Welcome everybody to another class of At Home with Theosophy. We are exploring Annie Besant's Karma, and tonight we are going to go through the section number 8. We will start with section number 8. Annie Besant begins by saying that sometimes people feel, on first recognizing the existence of karma, that if all be the working out of the law, they are but helpless slaves of destiny. Before considering how the law may be utilized for the control of destiny, let us study for a few moments a typical case and see how necessity and free will, to use the accepted terms, are both at work and at work in harmony. So the idea is always this tension between free will and predestination. When discussing about the idea of whether there is free will or not, some people are inclined to say that we do everything for a reason, that reason becomes a conditioning cause, and that just as we see in physics, at least not at the quantum level as we seems to know now, but in macrophysics, every cause produces a result, an effect that we can predict. So some people say there is no free will, there is only conditioning, and the choices we make are the result of this conditioning. So that would be the idea of predestination or determinism. But there are some others that sustain the view that there is free will and that in the exact same circumstances we can choose differently. So Annie Besant is here going to show that although there is a measure of free will, there is also a measure of determinism in the present moment. So in her view, the present moment is the result of these two factors. So she will begin by exploring what she calls a typical case. She says a man comes into the world with a certain inborn mental faculties, let us say of an average type, with a passional nature that shows definite characteristics, some good, some bad, with an etheric double and a physical body, fairly well formed and healthy, but of no special splendid character. These are his limitations, clearly marked out for him. There are many mental heights that he is unable to climb. There are temptations to which his passional nature yields. Though he strives against them, he will yield anyway. There are triumphs of physical strength and skill that he cannot achieve. He is within a limiting ring and cannot pass out of it long as he may for liberty. So she begins by saying that the conditions in which we are born set a limitation, which is true also in regular aspects of life. We may have a certain amount of freedom of choice, but that freedom of choice is not infinite. We cannot choose to jump from here to the moon, for example. So there are some intrinsic limitations. In the same way, our constitution, that as we saw are the result of previous actions, or is the result of previous actions, but our constitution sets certain limitations. Moreover, he cannot avoid troubles of many kinds. They strike him, and he can only bear his pain. He cannot escape from it. The man is limited by his past thoughts, by his wasted opportunities, by his mistaken choices, by his foolish yieldings. He's bound by his forgotten desires, enchained by his errors of an earlier day. So this is the predestination aspect of life, this particular personality and the set of circumstances that were generated by previous choices. Now she says something that is the basis of all this, if we can only perceive it, and she will retake this subject in the last chapters we are going to see next week, because she says, and yet he is not bound, the real in us. He who made the past that imprisons his present can work within the prison house and create a future of liberty. Nay, let him know that he himself is free, and the fetters will crumble away from his limbs, and according to the measure of his knowledge will be the illusoriness of his bonds. So the real in us is never really imprisoned in the personality. The real in us is always free. It's free in two ways. It's free to create a different future, but not only that, even more, it's actually free from any imprisonment, because the imprisonment is part of the illusion. In what way? Well, we have, for example, a philosopher. He was a Greek philosopher. He was part of the Stoic movement, and he was taken a slave, and he said that even though people could enslave his body, they could never enslave his spirit or his perception, his mind. And that is true. In our daily life, our problems are not really a physical problem. Of course, there are physical problems, there are physical difficulties, but if we look, most of our problems are of a psychological nature. We suffer due to the way we take life. For example, a typical example would be that we never had a certain object or a certain relationship with a person, and we were perfectly fine without it. Then we are given this object or this relationship, we generate an attachment, then we lose that object or relationship, and we are back to before getting in touch with this object when we were perfectly fine, but now we are miserable. So the objective state before and after is exactly the same. But in between, we have generated an attachment, a mental and emotional attachment that produces the suffering. So if we look at life, many of the things that cause suffering to us are a product of our psychological interpretation of life, of our desires, of our expectations. Again, I'm not denying that there are some physical difficulties, but normally we turn the difficulty into a problem because of psychological issues. For example, if we were suddenly put to live in the condition that Mother Teresa was living, we would probably be miserable. But she was there by choice, and she living in the midst of poverty and illness and lack of things, she turned her energy to helping others, and for her that was a spiritual path. So the objective circumstance was that she was poor, she was among illness, she was with all these limitations, and yet because of her psychological disposition, that was actually what gave fulfillment to her life. So again, we may be put in different circumstances, but according to how we take them is whether this causes suffering or not, generally speaking. So this is what Annie Besant is saying here. Yes, we are limited by our mind, emotions, and body, but since we are actually beyond them, if we could only realize this, we could be free from from any enslavement, no matter what the mental, emotional, or physical nature is. Now she says, but for the ordinary man, to whom the knowledge of this will come as a spark, not as a flame, this realization is too difficult. So she says the first step towards freedom will be to accept his limitations as self-made and proceed to enlarge them. So this is where what Annie Besant will address first. Not the person that is ready to recognize that all this is an illusion, but the person that is actually feeling that is imprisoned in this personality, and probably because the limitations are so thick, let's say, it's very difficult for this person to realize the truth that we just were talking about. So the first step is to enlarge the prison so that the mind gets liberated from all this pressure, and so that his perception or her perception can be freed to realize truth. So in this following sections, we are going to see how the law generates these limitations and how consciousness imprisoned in a personality can work so that the limitations can be broken to some extent. So she says, true, he cannot think as a genius thinks just yet, but he can think to the very best of his ability, and eventually he will become a genius. We have seen that the full use of a capacity and the aspiration for more, not more in the sense of acquisition, but more in the sense of enlarging and deepening, will produce a greater capacity. So all we have to do is, whatever our possibilities right now, we just have to try to use them to the fullest, to try to apply that to the best of our ability. So she says eventually he will become able to think in that way. And then she says, true, he cannot get rid of his passional follies in a moment, but he can fight against them, and when he has failed, he can fight on, certain that presently he will conquer. So again, we may have some emotional weaknesses or weaknesses of any kind, and our constitution may be such that those tendencies will keep on presenting themselves. But if we take everything as it appears in the present, at the moment, we can work with whatever is there without any sense of time. So for example, if we have a tendency towards anything, depression, anger, or whatever it is, whenever that anger, depression is there, that is there at that moment, and we can deal with it. We can work to the best of our ability with it. You know, either there are different techniques. We have explored some of them in the class on the thought power, in a previous class that is available on the website. So either you try to put your mind on the opposite, or you just watch it, or whatever your skill is, and you deal with the depression, the anger, or any emotion at that moment. Then that passes, and if it presents again in the future, that anger is at that moment. It is not related to the anger in the past. Psychologically speaking, we can see whatever happens in the field of consciousness with fresh eyes and just deal with what is in front of us without any sense of, oh, how long will it take so that I overcome this particular flaw. That's not the best way to deal with this. Our duty is to deal with whatever presents itself in the present, in the moment, because it is then that we have the power. So this is what Annie Besant is saying here. There is some reaction that presents itself. We do our best. We may not have at the moment enough strength to transcend it or to reshape it. That doesn't matter. That is not our problem. What we need to do right now is to do the best we can. and then that very effort will produce more wisdom. And all our efforts, even if they were misdirected, even if they were based on a wrong assumption, the very effort to do the best we can will open up more wisdom so that we learn how to deal in a more efficient way with this. So she repeats again, he is always himself, the free soul in the midst of his prison house, and he can hew down the walls he himself has built. So then she says that she summarizes how this works and says, he commits a serious fault, be it so. He sinned as thinker in the past. He suffers as actor in the present. He will patiently endure the penalty he purchased by his thought, and will so think today that his morrows shall be free from shame. So this is tied to an idea that I already, I think, mentioned, and this is that whatever happens in the present is a result of the past. So if we make a mistake in the present, or what we would call a mistake, even when we had the best of our intentions, what actually happens, are being unable to act in the right way, is a result of the past. Our best intention of doing the best we could, that is our present. No matter, regardless of whether we succeeded or not, whether we succeed or not in any particular action in the present will be determined by the past. But what is our real present is what we intend to do, how we intend to perceive the world and ourselves, how we intend to act. And that is going to generate the possibility of acting like that in the future. Therefore, there is no room for guilt. All we have to do is to try to do the best. And if we try to do the best and we fail, or we try to do the best and we succeed, that doesn't make any difference to the present. We did exactly what we had to do, try to do the best. And then the result is not our problem. This will be very important for what we are going to see next week, that is transcending karma, transcending this action through the personality. But for the time being, we need to understand the principles behind. So she says, the law that seemed to be feathers has become wings, and by it he can rise to regions of which without it he could only dream. She's saying this because since we know that this works in this way, or we know we are learning about it, we hear from somebody that says that she knows, but if we take the law to be a law, then because of the existence of the law, we can be confident that if we do our best, then that will inevitably produce good results. So a law that at the beginning may seem to constrain us actually is an insurance that acting in this way, these results will happen. So based on this, she will talk about building the future. Again, we are talking about a stage in which we think there is a prison. This prison is oppressing us, and therefore, because we think we are in a prison and the prison is oppressing us, we work at the level of expanding the prison. Now, at a certain point, and of course we have to work in that direction also, we will realize that the prison is an illusion. And therefore, when we are at that level, the expansion of the prison happens in a completely different way. But for the time being, we are examining this state in which we feel limited by the personality and how that personality can be manipulated or reshaped in a way so that a truer perception can eventually arise. So she says, the crowds of souls drift onwards along the sluggish current of time. So she talks about most people, they 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 don't even know that they can improve themselves. Least of all, what their true nature is beyond improvement. So when the soul is in this state of just drifting in life, the growth is very slow because it happens in a very non-directed way. As the soul begins to realize that there is a path, then this growth can be faster until the soul can realize that its true nature is already perfect, and that if anything, what the soul is doing is uh, tuning the vehicles of expression. So she says the student, when he grasps something of the meaning of the law, of its absolute certainty, begins to take himself in hand and actively to superintend his own evolution. Knowing that he becomes that on which he meditates, daily he will meditate on a noble ideal. Daily he will strive to live it, and he will do this persistently and calmly, without haste, without rest, for he knows that he is building on a sure foundation, on the rock of eternal law. During earth life he gathers his experiences, utilizing all that comes in his way. During Devachan he assimilates them and plans out his future buildings. So the first idea is what we have discussed, that wherever we put our consciousness, we begin to give strength to that particular aspect. So if we put our attention in negative thoughts, in vices, in these kind of things, we are actually giving energy to these things, and they will become part of our personality in the future. So if we put our thoughts, our attention, our mind into trying to discover what is real, what is noble, what is good, then the personality will be shaped in a way that is appropriate to the perception of that. And as we have seen, all this reshaping, it happens partially on this particular lifetime, and there can be an improvement even in this lifetime. But then the person that really worked on this in the next personality will be very different from this one. The improvement will be very noticeable. So she says, herein lies the value of a true theory of life, even while the theory rests on the testimony of others and not on individual knowledge. When a man accepts and partially understands the working of karma, he can at once begin this building of character, setting each stone with deliberate care, knowing that he is building for eternity. So the idea is that for us this is a theory, just as many things in life are a theory. Probably none of you actually saw an atom or the DNA or that the earth is round. So there are many things that we take from people who say that they know. And of course, in many cases, they are completely wrong. When they were saying the earth is flat, they were wrong. When they were saying the atoms were little balls, indivisible, they were wrong. And in many other cases, they are right. Life is a lot like that. We cannot prove everything, so we take many things based on testimony. In this case also, we are taking all this on testimony because we cannot perceive it at the time. But with working in this direction, eventually our perception begins to be able to deal with these things in a direct way. Now, Annie Besant is placing a lot of emphasis on the idea of having the building of our personality, and as we are going to see in the next chapter, even the building of the external circumstances under our control. Now, this is a good idea to take people away from this other idea that there is nothing we can do about life, or that we really don't understand how things happen, how this cause and effect happens. So that is a good idea to counteract that. Now, the problem with this idea, as with any other idea, there is, I always like to look in ideas to the helpful aspect and the problem aspect of the ideas, because any idea has these two aspects. So the problem with this idea is that it comes from the question, who is the one that is acting? Because this, if we don't understand it in the right context, this may empower the idea that we are the personality, and therefore it still operates within the illusion. So we begin to think, I am Pablo, and I have the power to build my character and to modify the circumstances, and that is true to a certain extent. But as long as I'm identified with Pablo, I will be within the prison that Pablo is. The prison may be nicer, maybe wider, maybe, more appealing, but nevertheless a prison. At some point, we need to realize that we are not this personality, and then the prison breaks or just dissolves. So what is actually happening is that the one self is acting through me, through you, through every one of us, and the one that is building, the one that is producing all this, is the one self through this particular expression that we call Pablo, David, Diana, etc. So we have to keep that always in mind, and we are going to come back to that in the last chapter, the idea of the impersonal action. So now Annie Besant will deal with the idea of molding karma. If the actions of the personality, or the actions that come through a personal center, are the causes that produce results on the personal level, then we can learn to act on the personal level so that the causes will be causes that don't become obstacles for the perception of truth. So as we are going to see, the karma that we talk about is karma that acts on the personal level. Because they are produced by an I, they will affect that I. If the actions are not produced by an I, they don't produce the personal karma that we are talking about. But as long as we act through this I, through this I-ness, we can learn how to act so that they don't generate further conditioning. So she says, the man who has set himself deliberately to build the future will realize, as his knowledge increases, that he can do more than mold his own character. He begins to understand that he is at the very center of things, in a very real sense, a living, active, self-determining being, and that he can act upon circumstances as well. This has the root, the fact that we can act upon circumstances mean that we are not separated from them. If there were a separation, we could not really affect them. So in the Theosophical view, and I don't have time to get into this, but this being that is expressing in the universe, it comes from the one being, or the beingness, then it takes on an individuality, and then it takes on a particular personality, but it's never separated from all the rest, because as Annie Besant says here, it's at the center of things, and each one of our beings is at the center of things, because each one of our beings are expressions of the same being. Because of that, because everything is interconnected in this way, then circumstances can be affected. And then, from the point of view of the form of the separation, she says, he sees that in his daily life, he can neutralize the ill results that would follow from some ill deed by bringing to bear upon the same point a corresponding force for good. And now she will take like a scientific view of the karmic forces. She explains, and this is, and when Annie Besant explained this is part of what the adepts do in a conscious way. If you remember at the very beginning, the very first quote that Annie Besant quotes from one of the Mahatma letters, the master is saying there that we are constantly generating forces. Whether we know it or not, we are generating forces. So Annie Besant says normal people, or the master said, normal people generate these forces unconsciously. An adept generates forces in a conscious way to try to help the development of evolution. So Annie Besant will explain how these forces work at the level of differentiation, at the level of diversity, because eventually the path that many times the Theosophical tradition is talking from, or the point of view from which this tradition talks, is that of becoming an occult scientist, in a sense, becoming a force in nature helping the evolution of the manifested nature. So she says, a man sends against him, somebody sends against one, an evil thought, and he might meet it with another of its own kind, and then the two thought forms would be reinforced, strengthened. Many times when we have an ill feeling about a person, a particular person with whom we are having problems, for example, that ill feeling that arises suddenly in our consciousness many times is the result of a thought of ill will sent to us. So this emotion arises, and what we normally do, or a person that is not alert to all this normally does, is to take that thought and to generate more of the same kind of thought and send it to the person. So we start thinking ill of somebody. And what happens is that then the two thought forms reinforce each other, and then we establish a link, a magnetic link with that person, as we have seen in previous classes. Now she says, suppose that the one against whom the evil thought is flying is a knower of karma. Then he meets the malignant form with the force of compassion and shatters it. The broken form can no longer be ensouled with elemental life. Remember that we form a thought form and then an elemental comes and ensouls that force. But because this thought form was broken by this opposing force, which is compassion, the elemental life cannot ensoul it. And she says the life melts back to its own. It goes back to the elemental essence. The form disintegrates. Its power for evil is thus destroyed by compassion. And hatred ceases by love. As you see in the Bible and the Buddha, they all said hatred cannot cease by hatred. It ceases only by love. Now, something interesting comes out of this. Let's see what Annie Besant says. As knowledge increases, this action of responding to a negative thought with the opposite kind becomes direct and purposive. No, I don't know how to pronounce. Purposive. Yeah. The thought is aimed with definite intent, winged with potent will. Thus, evil karma is checked in its very inception, and naught is left to make a karmic tie between the one who shot a shaft of injury and the one who burned it up but by pardon. So the idea is that when this happens, the evil karma that thought form was going to produce is eliminated. Why? Because remember that we study that a thought form that is produced becomes a power for evil. And the person that originally produced that thought form will have to atone for the results of that thought form. Sometimes the thought form associates itself with many others and becomes an evil influence, and it produces some actual effect, evil effect. And the person that contributed to this bigger influence, well, as much as we contributed with our thought forms, that will be the karma that we generated. Now, if I send an evil thought form to somebody, and that somebody breaks it down because by the generation of a feeling of love or compassion, an opposite feeling, then I'm not generating any bad karma with that thought form, because the thought form is not there anymore. So you may think, if you put yourself on the side of the person that generates compassion, you may feel that it's not fair, in the sense that this person is trying to harm you, and then with compassion you are actually saving that person from being harmed. So our ego reacts to that. Now, this is a win-win situation, because you win, because as Besant says here, the karmic tie between the two people is not formed. Remember that if you respond with ill will, you generate another thought form and you establish a tie with that person. And then you will have to work out, either in this life or in the future, this problem with that person, because you generated a karmic tie. If you generate the opposite, you don't generate this tie. So the person wins because he doesn't produce bad karma, and you win because you will not be tied to deal with this person and in a negative environment. So it's a win-win. Now the thing is that in life there are only two possibilities, either win-win or lose-lose. You cannot win and other lose, because we are all one, we are all connected. So either the two of us are benefited or the two of us will suffer. If we respond with aggression, we suffer for that, not only that person. Of course, if even though with this act of compassion, you break down the possibility of generating bad karma, this person nevertheless, every time that this person is generating a thought form of ill will, even though the thought form will be broken down by your attitude, for example, nevertheless in his mental body or her mental body, he or she is producing a very strong mental image. Remember that we have two levels of this: the mental image that is produced in the mental body, and then the thought forms that come out of it. And the mental image becomes in the future some kind of limitation, or some kind of problem in the future, let's say. So what you are really preventing from happening is the bad karma generated by the thought form. But then this person, because that person is generating this ill will have to deal with that seed that the person keeps on making stronger. So it's not that you could save anybody by having this goodwill. You can help people by having goodwill and help yourself, but ultimately speaking, each person is responsible for his or her own evolution. That's why there are no masters or saviors that can really come and make you divine, or we are all divine already, but make you realize that you are divine. That's a work that each center of consciousness has to do. But it's interesting to see how this works, that because we are all ultimately one, anything good that you do is helping others and yourself. Anything bad that we do is harming others and yourself. So she says, the divine teachers who spoke on the duty of overcoming evil with good based their precepts on their knowledge of the law. Then she goes on to a person that begins to be able to become a co-worker of nature, more on the lines of what the adepts do, a person that is a disciple of the masters, for example. She says, at a stage which is comparatively advanced, a man will not only build his own character and work with deliberate intent on the thought forms that come in his way, but he will begin to see the past and thus more accurately to gauge the present, tracing karmic causes onwards to their effects. He becomes able to modify the future by consciously setting forces to work, designed to interact with others already in motion. Knowledge enables him to utilize law with the same certainty with which scientists utilize it in every department of nature. So what she's saying is that at a certain point you can become aware of the causes that were generated in the past, know how they are going to be worked out in the future, their effects, and therefore having this knowledge, you can learn how to modify the effects of these previous causes. And she will explain how this may sound like cheating, but when you really understand the mechanics of it, you will see that this makes sense. So she gives the example of what happens on the physical level, at the level of physics, science. She says, consider the laws of motion. A body is moving along a definite line. If another force be brought to bear upon it, the body will move along another line, compounded of the two impulses. So you are playing pool, you hit a ball, and then the ball is going in a straight line. You hit another ball that will hit that one, and both balls will modify their direction. Neither of them will go in the direction that was intended, but if your intention was to modify the trajectory of the first ball, then you can do it. So she says, in doing this, no energy will be lost, but part of the force which gave the initial impulse will be used up in partially counteracting the new. The resultant direction, along which the body will move, will be the interplay of the two. In this, there is no violation of law, only the utilization of law by knowledge, and once more we conquer nature by obedience. So she's talking about how all these forces, they are constantly playing upon each other and constantly modifying the end result. So she says, all come within the sight of the soul, which is approaching its liberation. As it looks back over past lives, it is able to see there the way in which its bonds were made, the causes which it set in motion. It is able also to look forward and see the effects that these causes will produce. So let us now suppose that the advanced student, glancing backwards over the past, sees lines of past karma converging to a point of action of undesirable kind. So you can see the past and you see that will produce an undesirable effect. He can introduce a new force among the converging energies and so modify the event, which must be the resultant of all the forces concerned in its generation and ripening. So you have the opportunity of bringing another force in question, in play, so that you can modify the result. In this way, he may lessen or destroy the results of evil wrought by himself in the past, and by the good forces he pours forth into his karmic stream. He cannot undo the past, he cannot destroy it, but so far as its effects are still in the future, he can modify them or reverse them. So all the causes that have not yet been fructified in an effect can be modified. So she says here the general principle, which is a logical principle, I think. She says, suppose that vibrations of hatred have been set going in the past. by you, for example. You can deliberately set to work to quench these vibrations and to prevent their working out in the present and future by setting up against them vibrations of love. So if we have damaged a person, injured a person physically, emotionally, or mentally, a person in the past, that generates what we call bad karma, that will generate suffering in the future. Unless you generate the opposite forces, meaning you give this person love and care, and you set up a new set of causes. Remember that we find people in several lifetimes. So if you have the ability to see the past, many times we get in touch with people that we have problems of relationship. So you have two avenues there. You keep on, or three actually. You keep on increasing the problem. You try to ignore the person so that at least you don't keep on increasing the problem. Or you can actually do the opposite and try to help the person. This talking on a theoretical level. Sometimes it's impossible to help a person, but anyway, inwardly, you may have a feeling of compassion and love for that person, for example. So you see that in order to be able to do this, there are two requisites there to do it in the way that Annie Besant is talking about. You need to be able to see the past, and you need to be able, or you need to be beyond the reactions of the personal ego so that you can actually love a person that is being difficult. So she's talking about a person that is approaching liberation from the personality. And as the person approaches that stage, then all this becomes a possibility. Now, the reason why this is important to understand is because we can move in that direction little by little. Here again, you may have a difficult relationship with a person. You may have the intention not to generate ill will, and you may fail because of the kind of emotional body that you have been generated in the past. Maybe this emotional body, or at least the emotional body right now, is not able to feel love for a person that is injuring you psychologically. This doesn't mean, of course, that if you are in an abusive relationship, you have to stay there. Not at that level. We are talking about inwardly. In the outside level, many times you have to act. If there is, an abusive relationship, it is your duty to try to stop it if it is possible. Sometimes it's not possible, and then you have to do your best and generate strength because it's part of karma. But it doesn't mean that we should just accept anything. But inwardly, if there is a problem with a person, you may have the right intention, the intention of, okay, I don't want to have to feed into this ill will. So you do your best to generate compassion or love. And even if you fail, that honest intent will generate in the future the possibility to do it. So again, what we talked in the past, all you have to do is to do your best, and then it doesn't matter if you succeed or not. That is beyond your control. All you can control, if anything, is the present. Is what you do in the present, and then leave the results to whatever was generated in the past, and trust the law, knowing that the future will open up the door for this. So with these principles, the disciple begins to learn how to undo causes. And of course, some causes are impossible to stop because they were too strong, but at least by having the right attitude, you don't keep on repeating them in the future. So she says, granted, this knowledge is beyond the reach of the enormous majority. Most people cannot see the past causes. Even if some people may have glimpses of past lives, that doesn't mean that they can see the causes and understand how they will play in the future. This is a far deeper spiritual development. But she says what the majority can do, if they choose to utilize the science of the soul, is this. They may take the moral precepts of the great religious teachers of the world, and by obedience to these precepts, to which their intuition responds, although they may not understand the method of their working, so by obedience to these precepts, they may effect that which also may be effected by this distinct and deliberate knowledge. So devotion and obedience to a teacher may work towards liberation as knowledge might otherwise do. So even if we cannot see all this, the teaching is very simple. The attitude is the same, whether you understand or not the working. All spiritual teachers said, love thy neighbor, don't retribute hate with hate, have compassion. So if we have that attitude, we will be doing what Annie Besant is saying, not in a conscious way, in a conscious and directed way, but in a general way, by default. So again, what's our practice here? The practice is to try to relate with everybody based on the truths of unity and compassion and love as much as we can, to make the attempt. And again, then how successful we are is a different matter. So this is more or less what Annie Besant is proposing in this particular part of the book. And before we close, I wanted to add something more related to this. So far we have seen today how the karmic effects or the karmic law can be used so that it produces the effects that we think are good for ourselves. Now, in any action of this kind, we are always coming from a place of conditioning. For example, the basic conditioning or ignorance, as we mentioned earlier, is I think that I am this personality, that I am this mind, these emotions, and this body. And I work from the personality with all the conditionings that my personality has. And that in itself will produce a cause that keeps tying us to the personality. As long as you act as a person, you will receive results as a person. So that is the basic condition in working in this way. So even though that is the case, the problem in the spiritual life is that it seems, or this is how I see it, and we can discuss it in a few minutes, but it seems that there is a condition of mind. All the problem is at the level of the psyche, the mind and the emotions. The real self is perfect from the very beginning. So that's not the problem. And the physical body is just a body that normally reacts to nature in the right way. But it is the mind that interferes with the body, and that becomes, at the beginning of evolution, becomes an obstacle for the perception of the real in us. So all these teachings are directed to reshape the mind so that the mind stops being an obstacle. So it seems that there is a state of mind that cannot perceive truth, and there is another state of mind which can perceive truth. Shankaracharya, for example, who was the founder of the Vedanta school of Hinduism, the Advaita Vedanta, he would say that the cause of our bonding and the cause of liberation is the same one, is the mind. And he said, when the mind is impure, it produces bonding. When the mind is pure, it produces liberation. And then he would say, when the mind is pure, liberation happens by itself and is as easy to attain as eating a fruit that you have in your hand. So no obstacles there. So it seems that all this work is directed towards purifying the mind. And so all this work of generating better causes in the future is so that the psyche, the mind and emotions and their repercussion on the physical body don't become a very thick prison. But at the same time, as we said, it will be still a prison. It may be a prison of a thick wall or a prison, a crystal prison, but it's still a prison. So eventually we have to break through, to break the prison. Eventually we have to break through the personality. If you are at a place where you can understand this, when you can understand how the ego, the personality is a prison itself, you should be paying attention to this aspect too. Not only to work on reshaping the personality, but also to work on realizing that you are not the personality. So in this way, if we keep these two things in mind, we will be less, we may not fall so easily into the trap of the ego. And then eventually, as we grow, we will realize more and more that a state of witnessing and awareness itself produces a liberation and produces an order in the psyche without this action having to come through the mind. But as I said, we are going to discuss that in our next meeting. The next subject is the cessation of karma, and I'm trying to set the ground so that we see that in the future. So now we can go to some questions and comments. Is there anything that anybody wants to contribute? Go ahead, Ed.
So there's a lot in Annie's exposition which is not convincing to me, but let's leave that aside. It seems to me that what she's describing can be thought of like, suppose we're playing a game of pool, since she uses the forces and things like that, and our goal is to sink the balls in the right order, and we could be succeeding at that, or we can be failing at that, and you could say that since we chose to play the game of pool, we're constrained to what those rules are. At any time, we could put down the stick and walk away from the pool table, and all the rules of the pool game disappear, and all the problems of the and successes of the pool table disappear. So I think what one way to look at this karmic thing is, while we or the universe has decided the game is pool, here is how it works, and here is how you could sink more balls or sink less balls. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree. And actually, the next chapter is leaving the pool table and all the rules. What I would say is that it seems that, generally speaking, you cannot drop the table. I mean, until you put in certain amount of balls. It's like a psychological problem. You start, putting balls in, and if you keep failing, you just don't realize that you can walk away from the table. It is only after a certain amount of balls are in that you can say, okay, wait, but why am I doing this after all? So that is what I was trying to say now at the end. Of course, theoretically, at any time, we could say, hey, why am I am involved in this game? But that doesn't happen. It seems that because we are so involved in the game that until we play the game to a certain extent, simply, at least generally speaking, it doesn't happen that we can leave the table. So I think what Annie Besant is trying to do here is to teach us how to play the game so that we can leave the game as soon as we learn to play it. And that's actually what she talks about in the next chapter. How here she's talking about generating good karma. In the next chapter, she's talking about stopping any kind of generation of karma, which is stopping any kind of personal action. So yeah, it's a little the tension between seeing the world as an illusion or as a school. I know you don't necessarily like this example of the school, but I think that there are these two models and several others, and I think it's like a tension between these two models. If this is just simply an illusion, then there's nothing to do in the illusion. We should just leave the illusion as, just right now. On the other hand, if this illusion has some kind of purpose, then yes, the idea in the school is that you leave the school, but you cannot leave the school until you realize a certain amount of things. So I think it's a little the tension between these two models. Yeah.
So there's another analogy, and that is it's a dance. It's not a school. It's not an illusion. It's a dance.
Yeah, the dance of Shiva. Yeah, that's another allegory, and the lila theory in Hinduism is all a play, and you can take it like that, and the self is doing this because he's having fun. But some people rebel against that when in the sight of suffering. Let's see what people are saying here. But we cannot walk away from the game of life. Well, we cannot walk away physically, we can walk away psychologically, in the sense, Annie Besant said it in one of the previous chapters. She said, we incarnate because of our desire. So as long as we have desire to experience the separation, we need to come here and to quench that thirst. But that desire could be theoretically dropped at any moment, and the moment we transcend the desire, then we don't need to come back. Now, the Theosophical view usually will bring the idea that this is true, but you can only drop the desire after you have acquired the necessary experience. So there is, as I said, the tension between these two aspects. There is the idea that yes, you don't necessarily need to keep on incarnating. You keep on incarnating because you desire it. Now, if you stop desiring it, then you can stop incarnating. But at the same time, what in the Theosophical view normally is said is that because you desire to keep on incarnating, or because you need more experience, is that you keep desiring to incarnate. The moment you realize the truth of things, then your desire is dropped, and then you stop incarnating because you don't need it anymore. So there is an idea of a sense of purpose for the illusion, which in Hinduism usually there is not. The Hindu approach doesn't bring the idea of purpose. emphasizes more the idea of just an illusion. And any model, I think, is good in one aspect and not so good in another aspect. So let's see what David said. There seems to be a difference between the karma I got from Amazon, a German company, and the karma of the class. I suppose you are referring to the book, not to the karmic causes. And well, there may be some differences for two reasons. One that I am bringing excerpts from the book, and here and there I may edit a little part because I take some paragraph, then there is something that Annie Besant elaborates on that I may not put here, and then I can explain it, and then I take a paragraph that comes at the bottom, and I may need to tweak a few words so that it makes sense and don't lose the continuity of the paragraph. Or sometimes, I may put a paragraph before than the other if sometimes Annie Besant goes back to the same subject. So I may have restructured one or two paragraphs. So then that may be the case. I'm not sure if that is what you are seeing. But remember, this is, an excerpt of the book. Then Meredith says, turn your face to the sun and the shadows will fall behind. Why can't we remember to turn to the sun? Habits. And habits is I think it's a big problem in it. But also it's ignorance. Somebody says something that we don't like, and actually, what does it matter what other people think of us? It's irrelevant. But because we are caught up in our own image, we give importance to what these people said, and then we cannot feel goodwill against the people. So if our awareness were mature enough to understand that it's silly to, okay, anybody can say whatever they want. How does that affect what you are? If we can understand that, then we don't need to turn our face to the shade or against the sun. So it's a little habit and also a little of ignorance, I guess. So David is asking if we have a different copy. I took this book just because it was typed from the internet. I don't actually. Well, yeah, I checked with the book, a copy that we have from Adyar. The copy that I checked this text against is a copy that is produced in Adyar. So we do sell the Adyar books through TPH. So that may be something you can do. I don't know what publisher or publishing house you bought the book from. Any other question or comment? All right, very good. So our next class will be the last one of this series, and hopefully we will learn how to stop generating karma altogether. Meanwhile, this week you will receive an exercise on generating good karma. So have a wonderful week. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.